If you think the hardest money you'll ever accumulate is your first million, you've already started wrong. The hardest money anyone can save isn't a million or even 500,000, it's the first 100,000. And if that sounds small to you, that's exactly where the problem lies. Because that number isn't just financial, it's psychological, emotional, and behavioral. It tests who you really are when no one is watching. Throughout more than 9 decades observing people, markets, and decisions, I've seen a pattern repeat itself countless times. Intelligent, talented, hardworking people, stuck in the same place for years, not because they earn little, not because they were unlucky, but because they never managed to break through that first invisible barrier. They work, save a little, strive, and yet they feel like they're running on a treadmill that's not going anywhere. Their savings grow too slowly. It's almost not worth the effort. And then comes the silent, dangerous question that destroys everything. Is this really worth it? This is the moment when almost everyone gives up. Not out loud, not dramatically. People give up silently. They stop saving rigorously. They relax their decisions. They justify small expenses. They tell themselves they're going to live a more balanced life. And without realizing it, they choose the most comfortable path now, and the most expensive one for the rest of their lives. The first $100,000 is cruel precisely because it doesn't reward you quickly. In the beginning, the money doesn't help you. It doesn't accelerate your progress. It doesn't multiply. It doesn't impress you. Compound interest is still almost invisible. You do everything right and feel like nothing happens. It's like pushing a huge rock uphill day after day, without applause, without recognition, and without guarantees. This creates a powerful internal conflict. Continue doing something difficult without seeing clear results, or return to habits that bring immediate comfort. And here's a curious fact that few people understand. This period doesn't exist to make you financially rich. It exists to reveal whether you are capable of delaying pleasure, maintaining discipline, and acting without immediate reward. Money is just the scoreboard. The real game happens in your mind. That's why 2 people with the same income have completely different destinies. One crosses this initial desert, the other spends their entire life going in circles. Perhaps you're thinking now, but 100,000 doesn't change that much. That's another common trap. The amount itself doesn't change everything. What changes everything is who you need to become to reach it. Someone who builds their first 100,000 learns, in practice, something they never forget. Progress doesn't come from occasional intensity. It comes from unpopular consistency. It comes from doing the basics well for long enough, even when it seems pointless. There's also a rarely discussed emotional aspect. Before reaching your first $100,000, you feel like money controls you. An unexpected expense causes anxiety. A wrong decision weighs on you for months. After that milestone, something starts to change internally. You begin to feel like you have leeway, room to make mistakes, breathing room. It's not wealth yet, but it's freedom in an embryonic state. And this feeling changes the way you think, work, and decide. Now stop for a second and be honest with yourself. How many times have you started something with discipline and given up when the results took longer than expected? How many times have you confused comfort with happiness? How many financial decisions have you made just to ease the present, even knowing that the future would pay the price? These questions aren't pleasant, but they're necessary, because the first $100,000 doesn't forgive self-deception. Most people never get there, not because of inability, but because of impatience. They underestimate the time needed, overestimate the sacrifice, and give up precisely at the point where the game would start to turn around. And the most ironic thing is that when that point arrives, everything starts to get easier. Money starts to help. Progress accelerates. Motivation increases. But to achieve this, it is necessary to go through the quietest, loneliest, and most uncomfortable part of the journey. So the real question isn't, how much money do you want to have? The question is, are you willing to sustain the effort when there's no validation? Can you keep going, even when nobody sees results? Because that's exactly what the first $100,000 requires, and that's why it's the hardest of all. In the next stage, there's something almost no one realizes until it's too late. The exact moment when money changes sides and starts working in your favor. And when you understand this, your relationship with wealth is never the same again. There's a specific moment in a person's financial life when something changes almost imperceptibly, but definitively. It's not announced. It doesn't come with applause. It doesn't make headlines. Most of the time, only those who experience it notice. It's the moment when money ceases to be solely the result of your direct effort and slowly begins to work alongside you. Before that, every advance requires effort. After that, the same effort produces more results. And this transition happens exactly after the first $100,000. Up to this point, everything seems burdensome. You receive your paycheck, pay bills, save a little, and what's left always seems insufficient. If something goes wrong, a repair, a medical expense, a delay, all progress is threatened. Money offers no protection. It only reacts. Those below this threshold live in defensive mode, constantly putting out fires. It's exhausting, it's mentally draining, and that's why so many people believe they weren't born for this. But consider something simple from everyday life. Think of two people who work together, earn similar salaries and have similar routines. One of them has a small amount of savings. The other lives on the edge. When an opportunity arises, a course, a change of city, an investment, the first person analyzes it calmly. The second feels immediate fear, not because the opportunity is bad, but because any risk can cause a downfall. This difference doesn't come from talent, it comes from margin, and margin changes everything. The tipping point doesn't happen because the number is magical. It happens because from that point on, the effects begin to add up. Idle money becomes capital. Capital starts generating returns. It's not explosive yet, but it's visible. For the first time, you look at your bank statement and realize that part of the growth didn't come from your direct work. It came from time. It came from patience. It came from consistency. And this profoundly alters your relationship with effort. It's like pushing a bicycle uphill. At first, every meter requires strength. Your legs burn. Progress is slow. Many give up before the top because they believe it will always be like this. But those who reach the top feel something different. It's not rest yet, but it's control. From there, the same bicycle that demanded everything from you begins to respond more easily. The wind helps. Gravity helps. The movement is sustained. Before, you were fighting against the system. Now the system begins to cooperate. The most curious thing is that this point usually arrives when the person is already tired, when they think about easing up, when they consider slowing down. Precisely then, that's why so many people stop too early. They interpret tiredness as a sign of failure, when in fact, it's a sign of approaching it. Intense effort comes before leverage, not after. In everyday life, this manifests in simple ways. The person who previously had to choose between paying cash or in installments now has options. The one who feared investing for fear of losing everything now understands that they are no longer starting from scratch. Money ceases to be merely for survival and becomes a tool. It's not yet total freedom, but it's the first real feeling of financial control. And here's the surprise that few realize. Behavior changes before wealth grows significantly. Confidence increases. Decisions become less impulsive. Short-term thinking loses some of its power. This creates a positive cycle. Better decisions generate better results, which generate even more clarity. That's how the game really starts to change. But this moment doesn't happen on its own. It doesn't appear for those who only save when they have money left over. It doesn't arrive for those who live waiting for the ideal phase. It emerges as a direct consequence of continuous focus. And that's why it's not common. Not because it's unattainable, but because it requires going through a long phase in which nothing seems to reward you. Perhaps you're waiting for an external sign to know if you're on the right track, a visible increase, praise, recognition. That sign rarely comes. The only real indicator is consistency. Those who reach this point understand something fundamental. It's not about accelerating now, it's about not stopping prematurely. And this is precisely where the next uncomfortable question comes in. If this point exists, if it's real and changes everything, why do so few people reach it? The answer isn't in the money. It's in how most people live, spend, and choose comfort over strategy. And that's what we need to face in the next stage, where discipline ceases to be a concept and becomes a daily decision. If there's one common mistake people make when they start taking money seriously, it's believing that getting rich depends primarily on earning more. Throughout my life, I've observed the exact opposite. Before any increase in income, there's a silent decision that determines who moves forward and who stays still. The decision to control what you keep. This is where the game changes. It's not glamour. It's not motivation. It's applied mathematics with discipline. When someone consciously decides to pursue their first $100,000, the monthly figure quickly becomes apparent. It's daunting, something around $4,000 per month. At that moment, many mentally close the video. They conclude that it's not for them. But this reaction reveals more about behavior than about ability, because the purpose of this number isn't to be comfortable, it's to be clear. It forces you to face reality without makeup. The central point is simple. Money that doesn't pass through your hands intentionally always finds a way out. Most people don't lose money through big bad decisions. They lose it through small, seemingly harmless daily concessions. An expense here, another there, always justified. The problem isn't the isolated amount, it's the lack of criteria. Without criteria, there is no strategy. Without strategy, there is no accumulation. Now, be honest with yourself for a moment. Do you know exactly where every single real you earned last month went? Not an estimate. Not an average, every single real. Most people don't know. And not knowing is the biggest sign of financial vulnerability there is. Because what isn't measured isn't controlled, and what isn't controlled always slips away. When someone starts recording everything, something uncomfortable happens. A mirror appears, and this mirror doesn't just show expenses, it shows real habits, impulses, and priorities. It reveals that many decisions weren't made consciously, just repeated. This initial shock is necessary, not to generate guilt, but to generate clarity. Clarity is power. Without it, any plan is an illusion. There's a significant shift in the pattern here. Saving isn't about cutting everything indiscriminately. It's about making intentional choices. It's about coldly deciding that, during a specific period of life, accumulating capital comes before comfort, not forever, not as punishment, but as a strategy. Those who understand this stop seeing discipline as sacrifice and start seeing it as a tool. Have you ever noticed how wealthy people rarely talk about money emotionally? They don't romanticize spending, nor do they demonize cutting back. For them, it's simply about resource allocation. This behavior starts here. When you look at an expense and don't ask, do I want this? But rather, does this bring me closer to or further away from my goal? This simple change of question changes everything. And it is at this point that many feel resistance. A sense of loss arises, as if something were being taken away. But the truth is the opposite. What is being removed is waste, not pleasure. Every real that is no longer spent without purpose becomes future freedom. The pain does not come from the cut itself. It comes from the habit that is being confronted. Imagine two people with the same income. One raises their standard of living whenever they earn more. The other maintains their standard and increases their margin. In a few years, the gap between them becomes impossible to ignore. The first person always lives on the edge of what's possible. The second person lives with options. Neither of them started differently. They simply made different decisions. And here's the question almost no one likes to answer. If you were forced to live with less for 2 years to completely change your financial future, would you do it? Or would you prefer to maintain your current comfort and accept exactly the same future? Because that's the real trade-off that's happening every day, even when no one says it. There is also a powerful psychological effect when the savings rate increases. Each well-executed month generates a small internal victory. It's not excitement, it's confidence. You start to trust yourself more, and that confidence spills over into other areas: work, decisions, patience. The person changes before their net worth changes. This is not a coincidence, it's a process. But there's a detail that separates those who start from those who truly progress. Cutting back once isn't enough. One exemplary month isn't enough. Accumulation requires repetition. It demands consistency when the initial enthusiasm fades. This is where the plan filters out the curious from the committed, because when no one is watching, when the results aren't yet visible, only discipline sustains the movement. So the final question in this stage isn't how much you can save in a good month, it's how much you can sustain month after month, without applause, without validation, without external urgency. Because those who master this create something rare: financial predictability. And when money becomes predictable, it ceases to be a source of anxiety and becomes a tool for building. In the next stage, this foundation will be put to the test in a different way, because even when controlling expenses, there is a clear limit. And to cross that limit, it will be necessary to address something that most people avoid: the strategic use of time, effort, and energy. That's where many back down. And that's exactly where the path truly begins to differ. There's an image almost no one likes to face, that of living below one's means, even when income allows for more. Culturally, we're trained to do the exact opposite: earn more, spend more, improve your life, show it off. The problem is that this logic, repeated for years, creates a silent cycle of financial dependence. No matter how much you earn, if your standard of living grows along with it, the feeling of financial hardship never disappears. And that's precisely why living below your means isn't a punishment, it's a strategy. Throughout my life, I've seen people with high salaries living more anxious lives than people with modest incomes. The difference was almost never in the amount received at the end of the month, but in the commitment to one's own lifestyle. A simple statistic helps to understand this. In the United States, more than 60% of people who earn over $100,000 a year live paycheck to paycheck, not due to a lack of income, but due to an excessive standard of living. The more immediate comfort, the less room for the future. In everyday life, this manifests itself in an almost invisible way: an apartment slightly larger than necessary, a car financed for status, frequent meals out because time is more valuable. In isolation, none of this seems like a serious mistake. The problem is the combination. When these choices accumulate, they create a fixed spending structure that traps the person. There is no room to accelerate, invest, or make mistakes. Any unforeseen event becomes a threat. There's a simple story that illustrates this well. Two colleagues start working together. One decides to maintain the same standard of living even after salary increases. The other gradually improves his comfort whenever possible. 10 years later, the second seems more successful. He lives better, drives a better car, travels more. The first seems stagnant. But when a crisis arises, a layoff, an unexpected opportunity, the roles are reversed. One has savings, options, and peace of mind. The other has commitments, installments, and fear. Visible success doesn't always reveal financial reality. Living below the norm requires something rare: tolerance for social discomfort. People notice, they ask questions, they judge. Why don't you change your car? Why do you live there? You earn well, you could enjoy life more. You realize that this enjoying life more often means trading future freedom for momentary approval. Those who understand this early on avoid a common trap, confusing the appearance of progress with real progress. There's also a little discussed fact. The biggest culprit in accumulating wealth isn't the large occasional expense, but the fixed costs. High rent, long-term financing, recurring subscriptions. These commitments become invisible over time, but they consume years of financial potential. Reducing fixed costs doesn't bring excitement, but it brings power. Every reel that doesn't need to be spent each month increases your decision-making capacity. When someone consciously decides to live below their means for a period of time, something interesting happens. Creativity increases. Simple solutions become valued again. Cooking at home ceases to be a punishment and becomes a choice. Functional transportation replaces ostentation. The focus shifts from how I look to how I'm progressing. This internal change is more important than any specific cut. Many people believe that this kind of life is miserable. It's not. Miserable is working for decades and still depending on a salary. Miserable is living in fear of unforeseen events. Miserable is not being able to say no. Living below your means for 2 years is a conscious trade-off. It's choosing apparent backwardness now for real gain later. There's another surprising fact. Most people who achieve financial independence don't feel deprived during the process. They feel clarity. Discomfort exists, but it's focused. It has a deadline. It has a purpose. This completely changes the experience. Pain without purpose leads to giving up. Sacrifice with a goal generates focus. Observe the behavior of those who never seem to get anywhere. Whenever a chance to cut expenses arises, an emotional justification appears. I deserve it. I work too hard. Life is short. All these phrases are true individually, but dangerous when used as a rule. Life is too short to spend decades held hostage by poorly thought-out decisions. And here's the point that few accept. Living below the means isn't forever, but it's essential at the beginning. It's the foundation that allows you to accelerate later. Those who skip this step spend their entire lives trying to compensate with higher income, risky investments, or luck. Some succeed, most don't. If you've made it this far, you've probably already realized that controlling expenses and living within your means creates something rare: mental space, less anxiety, more predictability. But there's still a clear limit to this. Cutting expenses has a ceiling, and to go beyond that ceiling, you'll need to deal with something even more valuable than money: time. That's what we're going to tackle next. There's a clear limit to how much you can advance simply by cutting expenses. After a certain point, each additional adjustment yields little return and a lot of wear and tear. That's exactly where most people get stuck. They've already given up the superfluous, lowered their standard of living, and are already living within their means. And yet they feel that progress has slowed down again. At this point, many conclude that they've reached the maximum possible. They haven't. They've simply entered a phase that demands something different. transforming time into capital. Throughout my life, I've realized that money follows a simple yet relentless logic. It doesn't just appear because you need it. It appears when you create value, solve problems, or consistently put in effort. And when your primary income isn't growing fast enough, there's only one variable you can manipulate in the short term: how you use your time outside of traditional working hours. This is not a comfortable message, and it never has been. The world likes the idea of balance, but balance rarely builds anything extraordinary in the beginning. Every great financial foundation I've seen emerge had an intense phase almost invisible to outside observers, a phase where nights, weekends, and energy were converted into something that doesn't bring immediate applause, but creates lasting advantage. Think of an ordinary person with an ordinary routine: work during the day, home at night, some rest, some entertainment. Now imagine that this same person decides that for 2 years, some of the time that would be used for leisure will be used to generate extra income. Not forever, not for a decade, just for a defined period. The impact of this, accumulated month after month, is enormous. What seems small in a week becomes decisive in 2 years. The most common mistake here is waiting for motivation. Motivation is unstable. It appears when the results have already started to emerge. Before that, there is only decision. The person who waits to feel like it never starts. The person who starts even when tired creates something rare: momentum. And financial momentum works similarly to physical momentum. In the beginning, it requires constant effort. Then it begins to sustain itself. There's a recurring story among people who build wealth early in life. They weren't the most talented or the brightest. They were the ones who were willing to do more when no one was watching, to work a little longer when others rested, to learn a simple skill at night, to accept tasks that didn't bring status but brought income. None of that seemed grand at the time, but added together, it made all the difference. A curious fact reinforces this. Research shows that most people who accumulate significant wealth before the age of 50 had multiple sources of income at some point in their lives, not simultaneously forever, but strategically at specific stages. This dismantles the idea that a single linear career solves everything. For many, the real breakthrough came when they decided to stop depending on just one source of income. There's also a little discussed psychological aspect. When you realize you can generate income outside the traditional structure, something changes internally. Fear diminishes. The feeling of dependence weakens. You understand that you're not tied to a single source. This mental security, even before the money appears in large volumes, is already a valuable asset. Of course, this comes at a price. Fatigue exists. Sacrifices exist. There will be days when you question whether it's worth it. That's part of it. But there's a difference between purposeful fatigue and aimless burnout. When the effort has a deadline and a goal, it's easier to sustain. 2 years pass quickly compared to decades of stagnation. Here arises an uncomfortable but necessary question. What do you do today with the hours that aren't mandatory? Are they being used to alleviate momentary stress or to build something that reduces future stress? There is no universal right answer. There is only coherence between choice and consequence. Every hour invested in extra income now is an hour of peace of mind bought for the future. Many avoid this phase because it's not glamorous, it doesn't yield pretty photos, it doesn't generate social approval, but it generates something rarer: leverage. When higher income meets controlled costs, the savings rate skyrockets. And when that happens, the path to the first major financial milestone visibly accelerates. But a crucial piece is still missing, because working harder and earning more doesn't guarantee advancement if the money isn't directed correctly. There are people who increase their income just to raise their standard of living. The extra effort evaporates. For all this work to make sense, it's necessary to decide the destination of every real Brazilian currency even before it arrives. That's exactly what we're going to face next, when the focus shifts from earning money to making money truly work for you. We've reached a point where everything that's been said ceases to be mere understanding and needs to be transformed into decision, because knowledge without application doesn't change destinies. Throughout my life, I've seen people accumulate information for decades and still remain in the same place, not out of ignorance, but out of hesitation. Money, more than anything else, responds to clarity of action. It doesn't reward intention, it rewards consistency. If you've absorbed the idea of saving with discipline, living below your means, and using your time to increase your income so far, there's one last step that determines whether all this effort becomes something lasting or silently evaporates. Directing every reel with purpose. Idle money doesn't work. Money without a destination always finds a way out. Therefore, The plan needs to be simple, almost automatic, so it doesn't depend on daily willpower. The first practical step is to establish a system, not a wish. Decide in writing how much you will save monthly, not the ideal amount, but the realistic amount you can sustain, even in difficult months. This number needs to be taken out of your account before anything else happens. Automating this process is not a convenience, it's a strategy. The fewer emotional decisions, the greater the chance of continuity. The second step is to define where this money will work. Now is not the time to look for shortcuts, gambles, or complexity. The foundation of building wealth comes from broad, simple, and consistent investments. The goal here is not to impress, but to protect and grow. Each monthly contribution should not be seen as an isolated move, but as part of a long sequence that only works when respected. Time is your main ally, as long as you stay in the game. The third step is to create a clear rule for unexpected gains. Any extra money, bonuses, refunds, gifts, needs to have a defined purpose before it arrives. Without this, it will be spent, not out of necessity, but out of habit. Transforming extraordinary gains into financial acceleration is one of the most underestimated decisions there is. Small accumulated boosts make a real difference over 2 years. Now comes the most delicate part, the mental aspect. At some point, the market will fluctuate. There will be months when the balance doesn't grow as expected. It might even decrease. This is the silent test. The temptation to stop, wait, or protect what has already been achieved arises strongly. But those who understand the process know that consistency beats timing. Money grows because you persevere, not because you time things perfectly. There's something profoundly transformative about looking back and realizing you stuck to the plan even when no one was validating it. This creates something that goes beyond wealth, self-confidence. You begin to trust your own judgment. Anxiety decreases. The fear of making mistakes loses its power. And this changes all future decisions, not just financial ones. The strategic plan, in essence, is simple. Cut excesses without drama, increase income without glamour, invest without anxiety, and repeat this cycle for long enough. What makes it difficult is not the complexity, but the consistency. That consistency doesn't require eternal intensity. It requires daily commitment, one step at a time, 1 month at a time. If you want to make this a reality, start today with 3 concrete actions. First, write down your monthly budget and make it automatic. Second, choose a simple investment and commit to it for 2 years, regardless of the noise. Third, communicate to yourself that this period has a deadline and a purpose. It's not punishment, it's building. At the end of these 2 years, something will inevitably have changed. Perhaps the exact amount won't be what you imagined, but you will be a different person. Someone who has learned to stand by difficult decisions, to think long-term, and not to rely on impulse. And this person, sooner or later, builds wealth, not by luck, but by identity. If this content resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel to continue this journey with me. Like the video so it reaches more people who need to hear this now. And if you want, leave a comment sharing your experience, your question, or your plan. You can do it anonymously. Often, writing is the first step to taking action. Thank you for getting this far. The path isn't easy, but it's clear. And now it's in your hands.